Hey, welcome in. Well, we've got another in our continuing series looking at the articles of Victor Davis Hanson. And these are quite popular. I like doing them. And he writes a lot of articles. And in the articles, there's a lot more meat on them than, a 3-minute appearance on Fox News or something like that. So I think these are really worth doing. And the headline on this one is, U.S. leads bug fight. World looks to America now and for recovery. And the thing is, this has hit the U.S. hard. It's hit every country hard as well. That's the thing. Everybody's in the same boat. And this also comes as China has been trying to blame the U.S. for it. I mean, take a look here. Just a quick search brings up all these articles. China is trolling the world and avoiding blame. China fuels conspiracy theory, blaming U.S. Army. Here's another one. China's misinformation campaign that the U.S. military may have brought the coronavirus to China, which is, of course, ridiculous. Here's another article here talking about they're suggesting the U.S. military might have brought the virus to Wuhan. And from the New York Times, China spins tail that the U.S. Army started the bug. So anyway, now that we've seen that, let's get into the story. A current global myth alleges that America under the Trump administration is not leading the world fight against the virus in its accustomed role as the post-war global leader. Yet the U.S. was the first major nation to issue a travel ban on flights from China, with Donald Trump making that announcement on January 31st. That was a bold act. It likely saved thousands endangered by Chinese perfidy and soon became a global model. None of the ban's loud critics is today demanding it be rescinded. And let's just take a quick look at something else here, just to remind ourselves. And here's an article from Fox News. After attacking Trump's virus-related China travel ban as xenophobic, Dems and media have changed their tune. Here's Joe Biden. Democratic presidential contender Joe Biden led the way, quickly attacking what he called Trump's record of hysteria, xenophobia, and fear-mongering. That was in response to the travel ban on January 31st. And here's Bernie. In March, another Democratic presidential candidate, Senator Bernie Sanders, conspicuously insisted at a Fox News town hall that he wouldn't consider closing the U.S. border to prevent the spread of the bug, before condemning what he called the president's xenophobia. I mean, we all remember this. We don't need to get too deep into it, but it's good just to, take a quick look at it. Anyway, they've all changed their tune now, haven't they? You don't hear much about the wall either, do you? Anyway, let's continue in typical American fashion, as we've seen in crises from Pearl Harbor to 9/11. After initial shock and unpreparedness, the U.S. economic and scientific juggernaut is kicking into action. It goes on, already the U.S. is transitioning from a long, disastrous reliance on Chinese medical supplies and pharmaceuticals. In ad hoc fashion, companies are gearing up massive production of masks, ventilators, and key antiviral supplies. Hey, if you could subscribe, like, and share, that really helps me out. Thanks a lot. Now, you would think there would be no downside to that whatsoever, but, the media still manages to find it. I'm sure you saw about how Mike Lindell, the MyPillow guy, is turning his factories into face mask factories for healthcare workers, doctors, nurses. 50,000 masks a day. Here we go. Here's the headline from National Interest. MyPillow is going to war against making 50,000 face masks a day. So that's just one example. And of course, he was mocked about that. And if you want to see more on that, I made a video on it a couple of days ago. And here we have the headline. Clinical trials set to determine if anti-malaria drug effective against the bug. And that's, of course, Plaquenil or hydroxychloroquine. There we have here, the U.S. just signed a $450 million bug vaccine contract with Johnson & Johnson. So things are moving. Anyway, it continues. The number of known deaths from the virus, for now the only reliable data available, shows a fatality rate of about 7 to 8 per million people in the United States. That per capita toll is analogous to Germany's and one of the lowest in the world among larger nations. And I think here we do have to take a quick peek at the Worldometers info, because these numbers are just, we don't really know where they're going to settle up, actually. We know that I think that probably, countries like US, Canada, Germany probably have fairly accurate or more accurate than, say, a country like Iran, or certainly China, because we can't believe those numbers at all. But on the worldometers here, it's showing 16 per million. Fatalities in the US, let's take a look at Canada. That's showing 3 per million. But then we have some countries like Italy here, 218, 214. Here's 60 in Switzerland. They have a good healthcare system, I'm sure. Belgium, 87. Netherlands, 78. So there's still a lot of uncertainty around these numbers. But when you have it as low as 16, you have to figure that's a pretty good job. Is it completely accurate? Is it higher than that or lower than that? We don't know. Is Italy really 218 or is it lower than that? It's hard to believe that, there'd be that much of a difference between the US and Italy. But anyway, let's get back to it. It says the U.S. economy in 2019, with its near record low unemployment, inflation, and interest rates, was the most robust in the world. It will soon be the key to rebooting global production and trade. And let's remember, everybody's in the same boat here. And if the numbers are frightening you, U.S. 217,000 looks pretty bad. And it is bad, don't get me wrong here. But you've got to consider, Italy has a much smaller population than the U.S. It's about a fifth of the size, if that. If you were to multiply theirs by, to match the U.S. population, you'd be looking at 500,000 people there. Same thing with Spain. Same thing with Germany. When you start adding up all these European countries that it would take to make up the population of the U.S., this number looks quite low. And again, it's awful, but by comparison, I'm saying. And the point is that everybody's in the same boat, so somebody's going to have to reboot things. Anyway, continues, confronting China over patent and copyright theft, technological appropriation, dumping and currency manipulation was not just in the U.S. interest, but for the global good. A reckless and disingenuous China poses an existential threat to countries across the globe. The only world bulwark against Chinese propaganda and bullying remains U.S. economic and military power. And here, we'll just go over this quickly. He talks about, despite accusations of growing isolationism, the U.S. still stations 200,000 to 250,000 troops abroad. It has bases everywhere. It still controls sea lanes. The gas and oil boom has had a major impact, lowering heating costs for countries in Europe and Japan, and creating a stable source of production as well. Not just for the U.S., but for the world. And then also quickly here, he just talks about how the rise in natural gas production is the reason why the U.S. has actually been able to decrease emissions. You won't hear it on the mainstream media, but it's true. I'm talking about carbon emissions. And anyway, let's continue. The truth is that the free world would be a safer and more secure place if Europe, not the U.S., acted more responsibly. Individual European countries have junked their utopian EU brotherhood and are reverting to nationalist self-interest. That's right, closing borders, confiscating medical supplies for themselves. Fracking natural gas with less reliance on coal-fired power plants might have allowed European nations to meet their Paris Climate Accord promises. A lot of people don't know this, but Germany, everybody thinks of Germany as this technological green country. They still get 35% of the energy for heating homes from coal power plants. Not a lot of people know that. So if you're ever looking for hypocrisy on their part, there's one right there. Take that, Greta. Anyway, it goes on. If the European Union produced more of its own gas and oil, it would not empower Moscow and the Middle East through its colossal importation of their energy. And if NATO countries just met their obligation to spend 2% of their gross domestic product on defense, then the West would not be so vulnerable in such times of crisis. NATO nations could more effectively draw on their military and health resources to fight the virus. And also, they wouldn't have to be so hypocritical in their constant criticism of the U.S. military as well, if they weren't relying on them to make sure they get the energy resources that they need. Anyway, let's go on. Nor has the United Nations been much help. Its World Health Organization simply parroted Chinese propaganda in the key initial weeks of the virus. WHO claimed in mid-January that there was no human-to-human transmission, then suggested weeks later that a travel ban on Chinese flights would have little value in combating the spread of the virus. Both were lies, but were welcomed by the Chinese government. And again, let's just take a quick look at this. This does not seem realistic, does it? What's that giant spike doing there? Yeah, that doesn't look credible to me. Anyway, let's finish this off. Given the epidemic of misinformation, millions need accurate data. But poor readers are barricaded from major news websites by expensive firewalls. Required subscriptions to the New York Times and Washington Post, for example, could be temporarily waived. Unfortunately, the thing about the media, especially, New York Times, Washington Post, those types, is that you have to often read between the lines, take it all with a grain of salt. And then calling, travel bans from a hot zone, from an epidemic, calling that xenophobic that doesn't help either. It just really, it doesn't erode confidence in the media. It destroys it. Anyway, let's finish this off. Throughout the outbreak, the media have promulgated sensationalism and helped fan the hysteria. It could better use its muckraking journalists to police itself. Amen. And the last sentence is, any laxity in fighting the virus is not to be found with the U.S., but rather with its loudest and most opportunistic critics. And that brings us right back around to China, who's trying to pass off the lie that the U.S. military planted it in Wuhan, which is insane. Here's something else which we need to get to before we leave. Countries reject Chinese-made equipment. That's right. All those testing kits and medical masks are below standard or defective, according to authorities in Spain, Turkey, and the Netherlands. So they've been trying to look like the leaders in this. China, we're talking about, by sending out all of these face masks and test kits. Let's see. The Dutch Health Ministry announced it had recalled 600,000 face masks. The equipment had arrived from a Chinese manufacturer on 21st of March and had already been distributed to frontline medical teams. Spain's government encountered similar problems with testing kits. Turkey announced it had found some testing kits were not sufficiently accurate, although it said that some of the 350,000 tests worked well, although if you don't know which ones work and which ones don't, it doesn't really help you. And here's something that EU chief diplomat Josep Borrell warned. He said, quote, China is aggressively pushing the message that, unlike the U.S., it is a responsible and reliable partner. So there is, an information war going on, a propaganda war going on. And this is what they don't want. U.S. leads virus fight. World looks to America now and for recovery. They want them to look to them. They want to become the number one power. And I think that's looking like a tall order right now. And I do think that, and I agree with Victor Davis Hanson, that the fundamentals of the U.S. economy, and remember, everybody's in the same boat here, but the fundamentals of the economy, including the energy sector, although there's a big problem between Russia and Saudi Arabia right now having a price war, but that can't go on forever because those countries will go broke because they're so reliant on the energy sector. And then also you look at the scientific advances in terms of treatments, and I do think the U.S. is leading. And it's certainly getting help from other countries as well. I mean that French researcher who did the initial study on the chloroquine, for instance, right? But anyway, this was an interesting article. I do think there is a lot of uncertainty in the future, and nobody really knows which way things are going to go. Other than that, there is going to be some financial pain. No two ways about it. There already is. But anyway, another excellent article by Victor Davis Hanson. I hope you enjoyed it. I did. If you're watching this on YouTube, please subscribe because the algorithm does not want you to see this kind of content, and we'll try and hide it from you. So you've got to subscribe if you want to see more. Liking and sharing really helps. If you just want to listen, you can listen to Radio Baloney, the podcast. It is on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts and iTunes and Spotify and Spreaker and CastBox and Podcast Addict and a million more. Radio Baloney, if you look for it, you will find it. Thank you very much. I'll see you next time.